Hello again. I'm Bernie Norcott-Mahany. I work at the Kansas City Public Library and also at Johnson County Community College. April is National Poetry Month, and I am using a little bit of time each day to read a poem aloud so that you can hear a poem. National Poetry Month, the Academy of American Poets recommends sharing a poem, and this is one way that I have of sharing a poem. I believe poems are meant to be heard, and so a poem on a page doesn't really mean a whole lot unless it is actually given voice by someone reading it, speaking it, or reciting it. Yesterday I mentioned a poet, Walt Whitman, as being an unusual American poet, unusual for the 19th century, really sort of a groundbreaker. Another such groundbreaker was Emily Dickinson, who lived pretty much her entire life in western Massachusetts, in Amherst, Massachusetts. And she was a woman who largely lived a hermit's life. She lived by herself. She did go to college for a couple of years, but then returned to her family home and stayed there. She wrote poems apparently, daily, or as far as we can tell. She left a lot of poems at the time of her death. She had a few, maybe 5 or 6 poems, published in newspapers during her lifetime, but the other poems were just neatly stacked in boxes. They had ribbons tying them up, almost like love letters. And the poems were published posthumously. And I don't even know how they were ordered, whether they just took a stack of poems and then just put them, in the book in that order. That I don't know. There are books about Emily Dickinson that certainly could answer that, but I haven't consulted them. But she as a poet is well worth looking at. So her poems are all numbered. This is poem 104. The opening line of this poem is, "The Bible is an antique volume." Emily Dickinson, though she, there's a photograph of her, and she looks rather like a New England schoolmarm, so she looks like someone who might be rather strict and forbidding. She has, I think, a fondness for life, the wonder of life. And so in this particular poem, she's critical of the Bible as something that is used to condemn people, right, to make judgments. And she contrasts that with Orpheus, the famous mythical poet who could play music and bring stones to life and so forth. So you'll hear how the poem ends, and I think you'll get a sense of what she's doing here by setting up the austere tradition of the Bible and then Orpheus as something freer and therefore perhaps better. So this is "The Bible is an Antique Volume," poem 104 by Emily Dickinson. The Bible is an antique volume, written by faded men at the suggestion of holy specters. Subjects: Bethlehem. Eden, the ancient homestead. Satan, the brigadier. Judas, the great defaulter. David, the troubadour. Sin, a distinguished precipice others must resist. Boys that believe are very lonesome. Other boys are lost. Had but the tale a warbling teller, all the boys would come. Orpheus's sermon captivated. It did not condemn. So that was "The Bible is an Antique Volume" by Emily Dickinson.